give him the best round of applause he's ever had. Shafer. The subject on this wide open because I don't know. There's so much to talk about. I figured we'd just talk, and yet the subject is the evolution of a movement. I am glad to see that this is officially a movement. I can't believe there are like 10,000 or more people here. That's amazing, and I wish I could just live here forever with you people because I feel like Oprah must feel every day. It's not like I walk down the street like this every day, you know, but it's like Oprah opening her door. And when it comes to the evolution of the movement subject, I think it's really interesting because the tiny house movement would never have started without big houses. It seems like, you know, it'd be hard to start the tiny house movement in Japan, for example. Although it kind of did start there for me because I went to Japan and then I came back and I started designing tiny houses after standing around in my hotel bathroom for about 4 hours going, oh my gosh, you can do this kind of thing. Weird full circle thing. Now tiny houses are big in Japan, and I think that's very exciting. It's, you know, I often get credited as the pioneer or one of the pioneers, founders of the small house movement, and yet it's strange because there are a gazillion tiny houses out there, of course. Settlers' cabins, hippie shacks, cavemen caves, everything. Until things got out of hand with codes and zoning and our weird consumptive culture thing, the tiny house movement would not have been a movement, but here we are. Thank you, big houses, for that. It's been a very good thing to sort of push against. It's a great sort of prop. But you know, things have really progressed a lot since 1999 when I first. You know, it's hard to say when I moved into a tiny house, and I always tell a different story each time because everyone is true. But I moved into. One thing I never mentioned much, in fact, I don't think I've mentioned it publicly until just this moment, is that I was homeless before I moved into a tiny house, first my Airstream trailer. I didn't want to market tiny houses as the homeless solution, because even the homeless, like me, have some bad associations with homelessness, the word. Words like affordable housing, rather, you know, green, sustainable, all those ambiguous words that get misused a lot and misunderstood a lot, including the word tiny houses now, which sometimes gets misunderstood a lot. You know, in defining that term, in the beginning, for me anyway, a few of us, Greg Johnson, Shay Solomon, and Nigel Valdez, we started what we called the Small House Society, which Greg Johnson basically just runs because we all just kind of said, hey, have fun with that. And we decided our official definition of tiny house would be any house in which all the square footage is used well. Which means if somebody comes up to me and says, I live alone in 5,000 square feet and it's a tiny house, I have to nod because according to my definition, my own definition, that is true. I might be thinking in my head, maybe they haven't really assessed what makes them happy yet, but who knows? Because when it comes to small houses, I think it really does depend on the individual. So when it comes to tiny houses, sometimes, well, of course you can't, you know, I'd love to think it's my baby and I can control it, but obviously that would not be the case because it has taken on a huge life of its own. But when my ego creeps in, every once in a while I'm like, that's not what we call a tiny house. Because people call a tiny house something very definitive sometimes, and sometimes that's necessary for specific purposes like new codes for tiny houses. You gotta define them there. But when I hear these arguments of, yes, a tiny house is a house of 200 square feet or less with a 12-12 pitch roof, metal, and cedar clapboard siding, I'm like, what? Who said that, you know? And there are a lot of options between 100 square feet and 3,000 square feet, and that I think is what the tiny house movement is trying to point to, not to the fact that, as if it were a fact, that everybody should live in 100 square feet. I wouldn't want to with a family of 4 or more. So after living in an Airstream trailer for a couple years off-grid without any insulation in my walls, my test the test worked because I learned what I needed in those 2 years and what I didn't need. And one of the things I definitely needed was insulation. I learned that around Thanksgiving time, and definitely by Christmas time when I had to buy an ice scraper for the inside of my home. I knew it then, for sure. It was for sure true. And I realized I needed a bigger bed because I imagined this monastic lifestyle where I'd be living alone, and then, then I would have to give up my bed if I had an overnight guest because I'd say, oh, you can sleep in the bed, I'm on the floor. And it's just, accommodating for other people who might stop by is important, I suppose. I always think of The Hobbit, I always think of Elijah Wood inviting in the tall wizard with a hat who has to bow down. Don't build your house for the other people's height, but build it so they can at least get in and sleep there if you want them to. So I moved out of that house after a couple years of designing and building a little house from scratch, which I called the house Tumbleweed at the time. And I loved it. In building that, as many of you know, many of you know all of this, but here we are anyway. To say the obvious, there were some problems along the way, including zoning and code issues. So when they told me you can't build a house that small, that's actually when I decided, yes, I have to live in a house that small, because if it's illegal, I think that somebody should live in a house that small and be very out about it. And that probably is the real distinction between the movement and the everything that preceded it, because if you look around, there are a lot of tiny structures in backyards, especially in expensive areas like where I live, Sonoma County. There are like hundreds of tiny houses that existed far before I ever moved into mine, and yet we all had to be in the closet about it. Now I guess we're coming out. The claustrophiles are coming out, and things have gone pretty well for us. We haven't been. I was actually imagining, and this is only a slight exaggeration. I was imagining some kind of tiny Waco with me on my porch trying to fend off the feds. Like I can live tiny if I want to. And the funny thing is that it's so widely embraced by our human nature that even the people within the bureaucracies and the codes people and the zoning people, those individuals in there are like, yeah, and maybe we should look for ways to make this happen. And I was looking for ways to make it happen. At that time, I had to put it on wheels so that it would not be a building. And if it's not a building, it doesn't have to follow building codes. It was a trailer. And that was convenient until I found out you could not live in a trailer anywhere. You can't just live anywhere on the street in a trailer, it turns out, in Iowa City or much of anywhere else in the US. So it did turn out that I could live in a standard house and camp out in my own yard, in my own trailer as much as I wanted to. So I bought a 300 square foot house. Amazing that became available at exactly that moment, fortuitous, And I rented that out and camped out in my own backyard for 5 years. And the officials were very happy with that, as long as I continued to call it camping out. And I still do to this day. I was camping out for 5 years, and they were perfectly fine with that. In Iowa City now, where Greg Johnson still lives, they've gone so far as to say, yeah, if you just move your house around the corner to the backyard, it'll be fine. It's very accommodating. But I remember the first time I approached the codes people, I think it was either them or the zoning people. A woman named Jan, who was cool, but new to this idea, as we all were, I know I was, says to me, well, if we let you do this, then everybody's going to want to move into a tiny house and live in a big, cluster of them in town. And I thought, yes, brilliant idea. So I've been striving for my tiny house village ever since, and I feel like I'm actually in my community here finally. So if we could all just stay here for my sake, just occupy Colorado Springs. Then we would be fending off the feds. We'd be like, no, it's ours now. But the tiny house village thing is coming along, as many of you know. There are a few villages out there already, and I'm eagerly working on my own idea, my own iteration of the plan. I always imagined from the very beginning when I designed while I was designing my very first house, that it would be best suited to a cluster of it would be best situated in another, in a village. Because then you could share amenities. You didn't have to have your own laundry room. You could have a shared laundry room. But if you wanted a laundry facility in your house, you could have it. You just couldn't have it. You could have pretty much anything you wanted. You just couldn't have everything. So tiny house villages are very good for that. Outsourcing, as my friend Greg likes to say. He outsources his life. And a lot of this mentality, as everybody here probably knows, is just not thinking of your house as your universe. I like to think of the great outdoors and the library and the restaurants as my living room and dining room and whatnot. It's nice, at this point, technology has paralleled this movement so nicely. It's hard to say which comes first, chicken, egg, but when I moved into my Airstream trailer in '97, out of the back of my truck, I was thinking, how does one get phone service out in a hayfield? And then I heard about this thing called a cell phone, and it was like the size of a shoebox, and I got one. And I was in a very progressive liberal arts town, very academic, and that meant that there was a lot of looking down one's nose at people who were too hoity-toity. So there I was pooping in a bucket in a hayfield with this big cell phone, and I'd go into town and it would go off in the video store, and people would look at me like I was trying to be all hoity-toity. I'm like, dude, no, I'm out in a hayfield with a bucket. So things have progressed. I feel like at this point, if my laptop or even my iPhone had a roof on it, I would be set, It's like, back then I remember, I don't think Google existed, or if it did, I did not know about search engines. I'm sure they did exist. But it's a lot easier these days to find your tiny house porn than it was back then. If you Googled small house in 1997, you would have to wade through a lot of pictures of 2,000 square foot houses before you could find anything that's truly, small by today's standards. Now, I cannot keep up with you people. I used to feel like I was on top of this thing, but it's just like wild. Thanks, bloggers, for picking through things for us, because there's just too much. I love Pinterest. If you haven't done Pinterest, don't, because it's very addictive. That's where all the cool is. I used to stop at every single tiny house I'd see along the road, and that would frustrate the people I'd go on road trips with, because I'd be like, and in the end, after stopping several times, I'd be like, we have to go back 2 miles, because I was reluctant to say it at the time, but there was a tiny house I have to take a picture of. Nowadays, there's no point in me taking pictures of tiny houses because there are so many gorgeous pictures. Yeah. What'd you see? Yeah. Yeah, well, I totally forgot there would be tiny houses here. I was so self-absorbed with the idea that I get to go speak that I forgot there would be other things to do. Except for the dating part, I remembered that. That was a very exciting part, which I only found out about 2 days ago when I started looking at this thing online. And things progressed from there. The movement really, I remember reading one day the word small house movement, tiny house movement, same diff, and thinking, oh, that's a little bit presumptuous of that journalist to use that term, because, it's not a movement. And yet they were onto something there, apparently, because it is, and it has been ever since. It's exponential, this thing. like, as you know, in the last 2 years. Totally going mainstream. A couple TV shows. This thing. I can't believe this thing. Like, look at all these people. This would have been like 5 people in the beginning, with me trying to explain my idea. I don't even have to explain anything. I don't know why I'm even talking. Everybody knows. You know, I could begin and end any presentation with, tiny houses are more efficient, the end. And before the words sustainable and green came along, and for that matter, tiny house, the word efficient was used, a more quantifiable term than green or sustainable. Unfortunately, those who actually are of merit, who use the term these days, are up against every other marketing person in the world who uses the term to sell crappy stuff. But in the end, I've never designed a tiny house. I've just designed very efficient houses that happen to be very small. I called my first company and my current company a tiny house company because they were, oh, I know why, I remember now. I was trying to, small houses were 2,000 square feet at that time. And so I had to go with some other adjective. And there was a magazine, maybe still is, they may have had to change their name actually, it was called Small House Plans. Houses ranging from 1,500 to 2,500 square feet. And I thought, well, I better call these tiny. I don't know what people would use when they get super tiny, tinier than these, because start running out of adjectives. Micro, yes, yeah. I actually am like trying to come up with new adjectives myself, because yeah, it just gets to the point where I think that the tiny house movement is either leading or following. It's just immersed in this new culture, this cultural revolution. I do feel like there is a revolution going on. I feel like this is very much a people's movement. I mean, there are corporate entities encroaching and trying to usurp the identity of people and the people, and yet it remains the most, from my perspective, of course it would be my perspective where I stand, but it remains this amazing venue for simplifying one's entire life and the world. Houses are the perfect icon and representation of self, as far as I'm concerned. Every tiny house is that is built by the occupant is a self-portrait, you know, displaying the needs of that particular occupant, and it's also the perfect representation of the universe around us. It's like it is what we live in, and it is the perfect representation of the merging of those things, self and everything else, and boiling that down to essence, you know. And by essence, I don't just mean small heater, efficient heater, but the psychological side of this as well. Like, what is it that is that means home? And for me, home is very familiar. It is the familiar to which I return every day after going out and being in the unfamiliar. I like the familiar myself, you know, familiar, family. I like that at the end of the day, because who knows what else one is going to find when you're out there amongst the truth, which is that there really is nothing finite like home other than what you hold inside, your sense of home. Actually, to be honest with you, I'm more concerned with my website sometimes than I am the houses, because I want to present that sense of home for myself, if nobody else. Luckily, a lot of people are doing that now. So it's that sense of home that we're going for, that sense of familiarity, and I'm so happy to see so many people embracing that simplicity and that meaning that is inherent to home. The meaning part is huge for me and other folks. Meaning itself seems to be rooted, it's very well exemplified by home. An icon of home is an icon of everything, as far as I'm concerned. I'm very into the archetypal stuff, Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, and those homey shapes. Along those lines, it's weird, I can see my first house over there. I just got here, so I'm like, oh my gosh, I lived in that for 5 years. And that was my first design, and I made it as homey as possible, because you can imagine the challenge of trying to make something that size on wheels, that doesn't look like an RV, because there were a gazillion tiny houses out there before that house came along, because RVs are perfectly viable in terms of living, except for the insulation thing, which, by the way, you should check out my new HV, habitable vehicle, which will be coming out in the next month or so. But I had to make it very homey to get around that, to say, look, you can live in a small space and it doesn't have to be crappy. It doesn't have to be built for the lowest common denominator in terms of lowest price, lowest cost for design. And I don't understand the concept of like eliminating the design part if you're going to try to make something affordable. Like, just amp up the design part so that your crappy materials look good, in composition. Or even good materials that tend to look bad when done badly, like plywood. I'm loving plywood these days. Stuff like that, just vernacular, simple stuff. And my new designs, which will be out very shortly, aim towards that, that not having, you don't have to have $1,000 stainless steel boat fireplace in your home. I did feel like that was necessary because fireplace is very homey. It was necessary in my first home, but you can go to Target and find a very good $35 heater. That looks fine these days, so it's not necessary to prove it's a home anymore as far as I'm concerned. It is a home if it's a home to you. Well, I came here thinking, as you well know by now, that I would keep my subject for this very wide open. I had actually, on the ride over here, this whole trip is totally like whatever happens. Like, I didn't know, I missed my first flight, and then I didn't know how I'd get here from the airport, but a couple of women, if you're here, there you are, thank you for coming so early when we get in at 1 o'clock in the morning. They're like, oh, we'll come pick you up. Yeah, no problem. And then I get to, then they're like, oh, we figured out where your hotel is, and then I go to the hotel. I didn't know how I was going to get here. And then a couple of people like literally 45 minutes ago, they're like, are you Jay Shafer? I was like, yeah, this is perfect. This is what I was hoping for. I do feel like Oprah must feel every day in the big world at large, in this tiny world. So it's awesome. Please feel free to ask for autographs and things so I can feel like a rock star. Because if you didn't, I would actually probably pay you to ask. So I kept this wide open because mostly, this conversation, like I said, we could just say tiny houses are more efficient, period. Or we could go on and on talking about anything, almost anything, because so much of life is about home and how we live in the world, and in home and community. It's weird, like there's the Unabomber type of tiny house person living out in the woods. And I don't mean that disparagingly, actually. I kind of think there's a Unabomber in me too. And then there are the totally community-based ones. And largely the tiny house community is still a virtual community. Largely, here we are physically. It's very abstract to me, and all of a sudden it's real. I could actually come out and touch you people. But there is a community, and I'm seeing this galvanized more and more. But I want to talk now about whatever you want to talk about, because there's just way too much of everything. So I want to know what people find to be important. The two folks who drove me here this morning, I was just like, okay, what do you think what would you want to hear about when I get up on that stage? Systems were brought up, like solar power and what kind of system. My answer to that is actually very simple. It's like whatever you want. Tiny houses are not exclusive. They're like any other house, except more flexible in terms of whatever you want it to be. It could be solar, it could be wind turbine, water turbine, it can just be plugged into the grid. Oh, here's the big news. I almost forgot the big conclusion as far as evolution. I'm skipping like 15 years in the middle here, but I'm just going to go straight to the chase here. The interesting thing for me is that now, as of 2015, tiny houses are finally legal, recognized as a constitutional right for the first time in... since the 50s or so. So that's quite a few decades worth of municipalities and government claiming now you have to live in a bigger house because, well, the thing is that if there are going to be laws made by the states, and these housing laws are state things, also then handed down to the municipalities, they have to be for the health and well-being of the people. And the folks who make these laws actually write up that it's a private organization called the International Code Council, ICC, and largely comprised of the building industry, insurance industry, anybody who wants to buy in. Is the guy who infiltrated that organization here, who actually changed these codes last year, or whenever it was that he finally got in there? Anyway, one of us got in there and is like, well, we've just embarrassed them so much by now that they're like, okay, size has nothing to do with it in this case. You can live in a small place and it is not dangerous. So I've actually written, and there are a few remaining size standards. The big one is gone. The big two are gone, the big restrictions. You can now live in a house the size of that one over there, like about 100 square feet. That one would be a little bit too small. Got to have a separate bathroom and a 70 square foot room instead of 120, which makes it much smaller. The thing is that municipalities, I haven't even heard of one city who's picked up on this yet, that it's actually it's been decided that those who have been saying that it's constitutionally sound are now saying no, it's not. And I'm just waiting for the mass wave of class action suits of people trying to live small, which would just be a way to make the cities and whatnot change their ways. And at this point, I'm very Mark Lakeman about this. Mark Lakeman is a guy up in Portland, very civil disobedience oriented. You just do it, and then the city follows. Just do it. He started doing stuff, and the cops started fighting the groups that were doing the community work to make the neighborhoods better in Portland. And so the cops would come in and say, you can't do that. Nowadays, and it didn't take long for this to happen, the cops are there fending off anybody who's trying to stop them, because these folks realized, hey, this is a good thing. Pretty much said, okay, you can do whatever you want. Just tell us about it later. So let's open this up a bit. I would love to hear what I don't even know, what time is it here? I figured 10:30. Oh, perfect. That's kind of what I'd hoped for. Half of it. Questions and answers, conversation. Let's start with you.
This old phrase, small is beautiful. I would say small has to be beautiful in order for this to continue and be accepted, and it can't just go plain Jane American horrible architecture. And I'm sure you have feelings about architectural design because you showed how beautiful this can be, and I'm wondering if you agree that small has to be beautiful.
It's funny you should ask this. Just yesterday I texted to my friend, and I were talking about universal aesthetics, like archetypal form of home and everything. It might sound snobbish, but it's kind of the opposite of snobbish in my book anyway. I do believe that beauty may be in the eye of the beholder, but in another sense than it's usually said, because it's really in our innate nature, eyes, pancreas, everywhere. There are certain forms that resonate with in nature, with our nature. Geometry, there's only one geometry. It exists everywhere. And if it's violating those rules of nature, geometry, it's probably going to look like crap. And the only thing that can stand between the aesthetic and the ethics of nature is the human ego, as far as I can tell. So it's kind of weird that there's so many ugly buildings out there. It's like, wow, there's a lot of ego out there, and if you could just get out of the way and the good design comes. Thank you. And by the way, in case you didn't gather that, the question was, why are your houses so incredibly beautiful? I did see a hand over there first. Yeah.
So, in Kansas City, we were able to do what you just talked about and take that new international regulation, and we got a city permit now to start our first 12-unit tiny house development. The caveat being is that this first development all has to be on slabs. What is the thing that has to happen to have that translate into tiny house on wheels? We know we can construct them and we avoid the code, but by doing that we also avoid placement in a municipality. What's the solution?
If I'm understanding the question right, and I feel like you could probably hear that, but in case you didn't, the question is, you know, if you're building a cluster of tiny houses and you have to do it to code, in this particular case like on slab instead of on wheels, how do you do that? Luckily for you and all of us, these codes that have been recently changed should allow for that. If the city, you know, if they're willing to work with you, they should allow you to. Well, actually, I've designed my own codes and I'm putting them out there because the codes can't apparently keep up with our human needs. I call it fucker, which is People's Housing Code Reclamation. It sounds pretentious to be claiming me as the people, but it's all like the tested stuff that's tested as safe, not influenced by more for more sake for the consumption part of it. So yeah, look for my fucker standards soon. But until then, it should also be. And I am putting them out right now because I figure all the municipalities are going to have to adopt new codes really fast. So I'm like, oh, I want to get this out now. Maybe it'll be the new code. But yes, I think that the new codes, at least as far as what the ICC says, it's supposed to be fine with them anyway. I mean, I guess what you would say to your municipality if they got argumentative, and you always try to stay away from that, and that's like the last resort. Like usually just go to the press in the end and say, Kansas City is not allowing for simple living, and that sometimes changes their mind. But before that, you could say, hey, where's the proof that this is not, where's the proof that size standards are for the health and well-being of the people? Because the only testing done for that was fake, done by the ICC. And I don't think there's any other testing out there that is recognized anyway at this point. Thanks. I'm gonna go with you. Oh yeah, when I'm trying to explain tiny houses to people who may not get it, this is a good question because we can all use this. Pictures, you know. I do know that if I try to explain tiny houses, well, it was hard to explain tiny houses before I built my first tiny house. I was like, no, really, it's not really an RV. Well, yeah, it's an RV, but it's got, well, it's home, me. Thank goodness we can now I now like to say, let go and let Google when I'm in any argument. It used to be you actually had to argue things through with stupid people. You know, tried, and you don't, and that's dumb. That's stupid, actually. It's like you're never going to win that argument. So, but now you just say, hey, let go and let Google, dude. So they can go home and look at the pictures themselves and figure out what it is. I think it is largely it is showing, not saying, and not. I found that the key difference between my work in the small house movement and my work in trying to change fight for civil rights in other arenas, is that I often get too much ego into the other arenas. Like, I get really pissed, and I get really sad, and whatever. Well, piss is actually good. I mean, that's how everything gets done, but holding on to that anger is a bad thing, and I get that. Always approach it with joy and authenticity, just showing, hey, I like doing this, not, you should not live big, you know. That's always worked well. Yeah, Daniel, my favorite roomie.
Do you have any completed tiny houses for sale?
Oh my gosh, he says that at every workshop. We co-present together at my workshops. He is so much better at being a business person than I am. I can't convince anybody to be my business person right now because I think it would be hell. But thank you. I do have a tiny house for sale, by the way, Mr. Bell. It is my Gifford house out in Sonoma County, California. And if you're interested, please see me, or at least go to my website, fourlightshouses.com. It's the Gifford. It's all of the pictures of the Gifford on that website are of my house. Sometimes it's photoshopped onto a beautiful cliffside, or it's photoshopped. The real pictures are the ones in the bamboo garden, actually. eBay. I forgot about that one. See, I'm always the last with the technology thing. eBay, yes. Anyway, $50,000. Proof of ticket here, $10 off. Thank you, Daniel, for reminding me. I also have tiny house books, small house books for sale. I'll sign those. Yeah, I should remember to actually sell stuff, because apparently you cannot survive unless you make money while you're doing this stuff. Tiny house popularity seems to be highest in highly populated, expensive areas, because they make sense there. I mean, you tell somebody in Nebraska or Iowa where you can buy a McMansion for $100,000 that they could have a tiny house for $60,000. They're like, does not compute. I mean, then you have to explain to them that, oh, well, don't forget that there are the after purchase prices like heating, cooling, and all that space you're not actually using. You know, the smaller it gets, the more expensive it's going to be per square foot, all things being equal, of course, because all the important parts are still there, the expensive parts. So I'm so sorry that it's so difficult, although frankly I'm like, oh, but you should have been in this thing like 15 years ago. It's like, then it was really difficult to figure out the time. Oh, I have a tiny house available on the East Coast. I always forget about the Beaven. Check that one out on the website too. I have 2 houses for sale. That one is like, it's a little bit beat up because it's been sitting there for 5 years. But that's all, you know. It needs a new paint job. But it is I'm just gonna suddenly make up a price off the top of my head that's way too cheap, but I want to sell that house finally. Let's just say $19,000. It's a shell. So, you know, oh my gosh, you people, I'm the worst when it comes to turning off my cell phone during presentations. Yeah, the square footage on that one is same as it's actually, I think it's the same size as the Gifford, which is 7 feet by 16 feet. So it fits between the wheel wells on any flatbed trailer, but can also be taken off. So yeah, that 19 does not include the trailer, but you go on eBay, you get yourself a $900 trailer and you're ready to go. I'm hoping to see a lot of traffic on that front right away after this. Buy now, because supplies are limited. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure of the details. In fact, it would seem that I would know earlier, although I'm told that this hasn't been mentioned here at the Jamboree much, or maybe not at all. So maybe I shouldn't feel so bad, but I did not realize this until a few months into 2015, that the codes had been changed. Apparently, I'm not alone because the cities and counties don't know either, apparently. But I think it's just because this guy, I wish I could remember his name, thanks to Google. I don't have to remember anything anymore, just look it up. This guy was creating sustainable building codes, and I think this is like the core building code. I mean, if you can't build small, then, oh, yeah, it reminds me of the guy in Florida who built a 90,000 square foot greenhouse to show how big a sustainable house can be, just for himself. But my answer to you is, I think he just went in, he just joined in, he paid to get in, it's not that much money. And he just went in there and said, from what I can tell, you people are, you know, what we're saying here, like, how is this even legal or constitutional? Which is what we've been saying all along, but I think they've just been forced to listen. I also asked for a few interviews and answers to these questions for the public, to which they would just send back like copied and pasted text that made no sense. It did not pertain to the answer to my question at all. So I think they just got embarrassed, maybe. I don't know. So that's a long answer to I don't know.
The first step
to building and designing and, well, it would be designing and building and living in a small space is creating a list of what you actually need to be happy, which is the hardest step of all. I mean, the rest of it's hard. Don't be fooled. It's like building a tiny house is not something you do in a day, although I guess they're doing it over there like in 2 days. I've never been that fast, but that first step took me 2 or 3 years because I was totally immersed in consumer culture. Well, I guess I was kind of lucky because I never got too deep after I left the McMansion I was raised in. So I was living simply like a lot of college students do, and I figured it out before I got too deep into debt. And the trick was, well, the tricky part for me was, it's not as simple as it may seem. Like, I had to look at art. I went to art school. Do I need art on my walls? Do I need to make art? In the end, after like a whole year of debating this philosophy thing in my head, is like, I don't need art, I need to live artfully. Art is the practice for real life, living artfully and making things artfully. And, the gallery, in my head, like the gallery stuff is really kind of idolatry of ego and those principles of proportion and everything that's important in art should apply to structures and glasses and chairs and everything. So another long answer. I'd love to go on and on about myself and my personal philosophy, but yes, deciding what's necessary is not as simple as you think. For me, it was art. For a lot of people, it's books. Nowadays, one really wouldn't need many books. I still say if anything forces me out of my tiny house, it'll be my tiny house book collection. Thank you for repeating the question that I repeat the question. The request, yeah, the question is, how in the small house movement do we maintain some integrity in terms of like structure? Or, I mean, I've seen, there is a tendency, as we all know, with ambiguous words like green, sustainable, and tiny house, for marketeers to step in and just make a quick buck off of it, because as long as it looks like the typical tiny house, you can sell it, even if it's going to fall apart tomorrow. You can claim you have the most insulation in your walls, because some parts of the walls do have a ton of insulation, even though 9 or 50% of the house is not really insulated. Stuff like that. It's happening a lot, actually. Someday I will release my Dark Side of Tiny essay. It's actually very good, I think, but gotta wait till the slapsuit stuff threats die down first before I release any names. Once I'm rich and can defend myself, maybe they'll go out. But be careful. I think the key is to have some. I never thought I would say this as the rule breaker, always looking for the loopholes, but it'd be nice to have some codes. And the Tiny House Alliance has come up with some good rules. There's a case where tiny house had to be defined, house of blah blah blah, and so many square feet. And and it's important to do that so that we don't wind up with like 5 tiny houses burning down next year or falling down on top of somebody, and then ruining the idea of simple because some very simplistic minded people say, you see, smaller houses are dangerous, which is certainly not the case unless, as is happening now, things are totally unregulated, and I don't know how we can actually do the zoning and code thing with the villages until we have some kind of until we have my new rules, the people's rules, which are very simple and just commonsensical. Because otherwise, how can a municipality just say, yeah, build whatever you want? It's not going to happen. Well, it has happened, so apparently it can. But it'd be easier and better, I think, if we just have common sense, and that is enforced. Enforced common sense. Sounds like totally draconian. But yes, that is what I believe. Last question. Oh yeah, I thought the man was going to come down on us for tiny living. Turns out the man just kind of picks up on things that are popular and makes money off them, which is actually nicer than being cracked down upon like Waco style, by far. Yeah, but so the danger I think is from within. If we define tiny house too much, and if we get too exclusive about it, like your house isn't like tinier than thou sort of mentality, that exclusivity would really hamper the movement, because anybody who is looking to live more simply, you know, even if they're just paring down from 6,000 to 5,000 square feet, is thinking in the same way we're thinking here. So I'd hate to exclude them. That exclusivity and the making sure that corruption doesn't erode from within, by, you know, with people getting, taking advantage of the name tiny house. Another reason not to define it too sharply, unless we actually, like the Tiny House Alliance. By the way, I'm proud to say I started the Tiny House Alliance, kind of like the Small House Society, in the sense that I suggested maybe it was a good idea. Then I totally dropped the ball and it's like, oh, you guys are awesome, just do this. And I have done nothing at all for it since. So thank you, Tiny House Alliance, for making an amazing website. So the key to this movement's survival is the same as any other people's movement, which is to keep it of the people and don't let corporate greed take it away, and bad ethics and aesthetics and all that stuff we know is not of integrity, even though we're told ethics and aesthetics are subjective. I don't think it's that much so. I think it's like we know when it's not of integrity, so we just got to maintain that integrity and say, this ain't right, this is right, to some degree. You know, there's common sense. Common sense, that's the answer. That's how we'll survive. Thank you.
Well, round of applause.